Immersion! Oh yeah, the thing that gets you so invested in a game to the point you forget how miserable your real life is. So how important is it really, and how do we define it precisely? All hoes aside, all jokes aside, let me try and break down what the game needs to be considered as immersive. I created a list, because I really like making lists, and I wrote down the things I consider important for creating an immersive experience. Before we begin though, note to my respected viewers and subscribers, this is highly subjective topic, so feel free to leave your thoughts so we can have a constructive discussion. Oh yeah, I also got a new mic. If you didn't notice already, my voice is more beautiful than usual. I can finally stop using this shit. Right, let's pull out that damn list already. So here it is, but wait, for reasons of immersive nature, we're gonna call it a scroll. Okay, atmosphere and music, world map and story. Wow, such a list, 3 things. By no particular order. Now obviously every game has some sort of atmosphere going on, even the bad ones. The biggest purpose of atmosphere is to set you in a certain mood throughout the game. One would argue the graphics play one of the key parts in this department, and that's not far away from the truth. But I would argue that the color palette of the game is far more important for creating the desirable atmosphere. A few examples on top of my mind would be the first Witcher game and Diablo 3. Even though the Witcher 1 graphics are downright laughable at this point, I would still feel the creeps just by exploring the outskirts of Vizima, one of the earliest zones in the game. The color palette of this zone and the game in general is creating this creepy horror theme, and it's obvious that this was the intent of the developer. While walking throughout the place, you can almost feel how miserable it is to live here, especially at night. The lovely people you meet here will kindly confirm this.
Your mother sucks dwarf cock!
And while The Witcher 2 and Witcher 3 were much more superior in general, they fell short of creating this dark atmosphere that I felt in Witcher 1, and one of the reasons for this is the color palette. What about Diablo 3? Why did I mention it along with The Witcher 1? Well, maybe you can already guess, but it's for a completely opposite reason. The devs tried to create this horror atmosphere theme with a serious tone, but it failed miserably since the color palette of the game looked like it came out straight from Dora the Explorer. If you go back to Diablo 2 even today after almost 20 years, the sense of immersion is still strong, even though you're looking at a bunch of pixelated mess. The atmosphere is still there, man. You can feel it. You can really feel it. These two games are only related to dark and horror atmosphere just for some examples of strong immersion. But a good atmosphere in games is not exclusive for only dark and horror, of course. And what about the music? It's really important for immersion and creating the right mood that complements the environment your character is in. Gothic 3 and the Elder Scrolls games in general are the games that comes to my mind when I think about the music. The ambient music in Gothic 3 was so well done and underrated as hell. All 3 main zones had distinctive soundtracks that stick with you long after you quit the game. Here are just some examples. I don't think I even have to play some of the tracks from the Elder Scrolls series, since most of the people already heard those awesome tracks. Combat music can be annoying and tense sometimes, especially after you heard it for God knows how much, but nevertheless, it's a useful asset. One of the best tracks I ever heard in a fight is coming from the Witcher 3 boss fight in Hearts of Stone expansion. Without a decent world building, the level of immersion in a game can be high as feminist interest in common sense. Or man, if the world in a game sucks, it's highly possible that I won't get invested in a game for very long, and one of the examples I have here is the game you probably heard about if you're into action RPGs, and it's Dragon's Dogma: The Dark Horizon. While this game has an amazing combat system and it's fun to play for that reason alone, the world felt to me like it was made in MS Paint. Now, I know man, I know what you gonna say, right? Something like, yo C4G, aren't you that faggot that likes those Eurogen games like Gothic 3 and Elex, right? Fuck you. Well, fuck you too, man. No, but for real, like I said, the game is worth playing just for the combat system alone, but I still do think the world design was bad. It had some interesting dungeons though, I'll give it that. The main problem of modern open world RPG is the size of the map. Some developers like to brag about the size of the map and how much bigger is it than the last game in the series. And of course, here lies the problem, since we all know that there is nothing wrong with smaller and meaningful maps. But marketing, right? When the world is huge, we usually get some activities that we can do. Basically just busy work. There is nothing wrong with having a big world map if done properly, since the world becomes much more believable and immersive. The thing I always find really beneficial for world building is verticality. This makes traversing the world much more interesting, especially if the exploration is rewarding in a way. Cities and villages are also important for making a believable world space that you can connect with. Even if it's not believable, it needs to be at least interesting to look at and play around. The first Dark Souls had an amazing vertical world that was not too big and yet not small by any degree. It's one of those games where you know the map better than your own neighborhood. An open world RPG with a large map done properly is the game I won't shut up about. I think it's worth playing just for the world building itself. A lot of vertical exploration with a jetpack that has just enough fuel for you to land on the next cliff you spotted, or just safely land after a long jump down the cliff. No loading screens while traversing also helps a lot for immersion, since you don't feel like entering another dimension whenever you go into a cave or a house. Having diverse locations also helps. Weather system that can really change how the landmass looks, even if it's not permanent. In general, developers should be creative a lot with the worlds they create. Immersing yourself in a heavily story-driven RPG can be really easy unless your attention span is smaller than Mila Kunis' tits. It has to be good though, the story I mean. In heavily story-driven games, we have a lot of cutscenes, which helps us a lot to invest ourselves fully in the game, since that's equivalent to watching a movie, but instead of just watching, we get to play as the main protagonist. But what about RPGs that are not filled with these cutscenes, or RPGs in which you have to make your own character? Those games are bound to have worse stories than the games we mentioned before. The story itself can be on par with story-driven RPGs, but the delivery is bound to make it less immersive. Maybe I'm easy to please when it comes to the story in action RPGs, but I basically have just a couple of criteria. I need a good introduction to the game's story, decent pacing of the main quest, freedom of approach of doing the quests, and a few really memorable characters at least. Of course, it needs to hold my attention and be fun, but fun is highly subjective. For side quests, I like to have some sort of purpose behind them. I'm not saying I can't swallow a couple of generic RPG quests, since those will always have their place in an RPG, but I'm not going to argue if you give me a meaning behind everything you do in the game. Witcher 3 had exceptional side quests presented as the Witcher contracts, treasure hunts and side quests in general. All of those quests had an engaging story behind them, and they had an impact of the main story as well. Not every RPG has to be like this though. Developers can add purpose behind your actions with different mechanics. In Gothic 3, a large majority of side quests would add a certain benefit towards different factions in the game. Increasing the reputation with a faction brought you different benefits with that respectable faction. Almost every quest you did had some meaning, even if it was minor. One more thing when it comes to the quests in general. You could do them without even having them in your quest log by accident, and they will still count as completed. For example, you enter some random cave, you kill some wolves and you see quest completed. So in order to get the reward for the quest, if there is any, you have to find the NPC that would give you the certain quest. To me, this feels much more immersive than just spawning the wolves in the cave only after you talk to the NPC. I mentioned freedom of approach when doing quests, having different ways of completing the quest, and even failing, which we don't see often in RPGs. The main quest should not have false sense of emergency. This can only create tension for following the main quest religiously, which is not a bad thing per se, but we play RPGs mainly for doing whatever we want, right? Right. There, I try to keep this short and straight to the point. I'm sure you have your ideas of what makes you immersed in a game, and I would like to hear it in the comments. If you want to support me, please like the video and consider subscribing to the channel for more awesome content. And consider subscribing to the channel for more awesome content to come. I'll see you in the next one.